We've heard it all before, haven't we? British jobs for British workers. British people will be at the top of the list for council housing, and yet there is a feeling, there is a perception in the country that that simply isn't the case. A feeling that people come here as refugees, they come here maybe across the Channel, and they're allowed to stay. They come from Ukraine or other parts of the world. They're given indefinite leave to remain. And there is a feeling, a perception, in many parts of the country that actually council housing is favoured for those people rather than for families who perhaps have lived in their cities for generations, perhaps in some cases even for hundreds of years. And yet, Liam Halligan, who joins me in the studio, suddenly the government are saying, oh, it's OK, we're going to start prioritising British people. We've heard it all before, haven't we?
I think there might be an election
funny
in the offing, Nigel. Funnily you should say that. Look, the fundamental underlying problem here is a shortage of what we call social housing. That is council housing provided by councils and housing provided by not-for-profit housing associations but allocated by councils for low-income, otherwise vulnerable families for roughly half the market rent. Now, in 1979, at the eve of the Thatcher era, a third of British households lived in social housing. A third. 1 in 3. It's now about 1 in 8. Even so, we've got far fewer council houses, social housing, than we had because we sold lots of them off. They weren't replaced. But also we've got far fewer per head because we've got about 20 million more people than we did.
And a waiting list of about 1.2 million people.
And a waiting list of about 1.2 million people. And let's be clear, those 1.2 million people will often include families in deep need. I must mention the charity Shelter, maybe not your natural affinity, but I know you respect them as well. They do great work in this area. A lot of those families are in bed and breakfast, they are in temporary accommodation, they are in substandard accommodation, almost Dickensian. These are not necessarily people who don't want to go and work for a living. These are families in genuine need. Now, we've got a situation where the election's approaching, Labour knows it needs seats in the Red Wall, win them back from the Tories, and they know that across the Red Wall in particular, a lot of families are worried that their kids can't get the council housing that they had. They can't afford to put a roof over their heads. They can't afford the private rental market, and they certainly can't afford to buy. And lots of families are in that position. That's why Labour and the Tories are now sort of vying with each other. British homes for British workers. Even Gordon Brown did it back in 2010. Didn't do him any good. So let's have a look at the numbers. Let's have a look at the numbers. Because you rightly said, I thought you were very careful with your language, there is a perception in some areas. Now, 17% of the British population is now foreign-born, right? But only 10% of council housing across the country is given new council housing tenancies to families headed by somebody who is foreign-born. So across the board, actually, foreign-born families or foreign-born parents who have kids here are underrepresented when it comes to council housing. But, and it's a key but, in some parts of the country, for instance, where I grew up, the London Borough of Brent. I'm a proud boy from Kingsbury, a hyper-diverse borough, even in my day, even more so now. 40% of new council house tenancies goes to foreign-born heads of family. In south of the river, not that I ever go south of the river as a North Londoner, south of the river in Southwark, it's 29%. And I could give you similar numbers. I won't bamboozle everybody at this time of night with numbers. I could give you similar numbers for areas in the Midlands, the North West, and even some wards in the North East. So when some indigenous, if you like, families saying it's not fair, they do have a point. But a lot of people will throw at them the general statistics across the country that show that foreign-born households are not overrepresented on the council house waiting list and tenancies, even though they are in specific areas.
There are some groups, though, sub-Saharan Africans, appear to be, take up a huge percentage of social housing. So it depends, to some extent, with migrant groups, how upwardly mobile they've been or they haven't. And clearly this particular group, sub-Saharan Africans...
there aren't many Hong Kong Chinese who have emigrated here who are in social housing, for instance.
Exactly. So the point you're making is there are parts of the country in which that particular feeling amongst the general public is true.
Is a valid feeling and one that politicians are stupid to deny. Hoity-toity economists like me are wrong to dismiss. This is real people's lives and livelihoods. Take it from me. My mum grew up in a council house, 10 kids, as did many of my cousins. I was first generation home ownership. I understand absolutely to my fingertips the gnawing insecurity that comes from having a council house and worrying that your kids who have low-income jobs or other difficulties in their lives won't get a council house, even though you've been paying into the system for generations.
Yeah, and they can make these promises because it's an election, but nothing will change at all.
Well, it strikes me that in only 2 of the last 43 years, right, have we built more council houses than we've demolished.
Yeah. No. Look, the sale of council houses, for those people that could buy their council houses, was a wonderful thing.
It was a great idea, but the legislation said you had to replace them one for one.
And it didn't happen.
The Heseltine, Peter Walker legislation, and it didn't actually happen. And still, there's this mad situation where if a local authority builds a council house, right, and then it has to sell it after 3 years of some family living there, it then has to give 5/6 of the money from the sale back to the Treasury.
I know.
I really sympathise with local council leaders, and I know many that converse with me. I wrote about them in my book, Home Truths. They want to build council houses, but it just doesn't make any sense because they're going to have to sell them on immediately, and it's not as if they can keep the money to build more. The Treasury rules, the ever-grasping centre, the Treasury Whitehall, they want 5/6 of the money back.
This needs a complete rethink. We ran a feature last night on Bakewell. Market town up in Derbyshire, the last bank about to close, the usual problem, Liam.
Nice with a cup of tea as well.
Funny enough, it was Adam Cherry, our correspondent, was there. It was really quite amusing. But I mean, again, the small business, the market trader, he's taking 5s and 10s. He's now got a 25-minute drive to bank his cash. All of that stuff. Another bombshell today from Lloyds.
Indeed, that Bakewell story, it shows that a big kind of banking desert, if you like, up there in a beautiful part of the country. It's indicative of branches closing, high streets being hollowed out, not just in towns, but many cities as well. And I think maybe under the cover of that NatWest announcement up in Bakewell, knowing that we were all talking about NatWest and Bakewell, I think Lloyd just slipped out the news that, we're going to lay off 1,600 people as well in our branch network because we're closing lots of branches. 10 years ago, Nigel, 2012, there were 14,000 branches locally of banks and building societies. How many now? Just over 8,000, a 40% drop. Absolutely massive. Lloyds, in their defence, they say that for the 1,600 jobs they're losing, they're creating 800 more. It's a net loss of 800, but those 800, they'll be kind of tech bro, vibey jobs, little moustaches, funny shoes.
Working from home.
Flat white lattes in Shoreditch, the places you don't hang out. And it will be the little local part-time jobs for families in banking branches, the convenience of keeping local communities together through the banks. Across the country, they're the ones that will lose their jobs. So, yes, we're losing only 800 jobs from Lloyds, but I think, for me, we're losing a lot more than that.
Yeah, and as you say, the impact on local communities. I mean, well, as you know, the whole banking issue is something that I've been
You should look at it sometime.
I know, maybe one day get involved.
Tell me about your situation. The country needs to know.
One last quick thought on this. There is a solution to this. It's the hub. It's the banking hub. It's a small office in a high street where there's a couple of tellers and they can withdraw and pay in cash and perform basic banking services for the big four, plus maybe some of the building societies as well. And yet, in total, there's about 2 or 3 dozen around the country.
But you know what?
There's a reluctance.
I don't think the banking industry actually wants to do it. Because as well as saving money on staff costs when you diminish the branch network, even though if you get a banking licence, you've got a legal obligation to provide banking services. That all seems to go by the wayside. The big banks, they want to save the money from the staff of local banks. They want to sell off the property and make money from that. But do they really want physical banking? Don't they want entirely internet banking?
Otherwise,
they can sell / rent the data to the franchise. Otherwise, they've got all those cash handling costs.
Because the hubs would work.
Because the hubs would work and would keep cash flowing. And I've said it before, you and I have been, hauled over the coals by the headmaster, haven't we? For stressing that we want to keep cash, even though 250,000 GB News viewers and listeners said that we were right. The Chancellor said we was right when we gave him a petition in Downing Street. The Prime Minister said we were right at the House of Commons dispatch box. But I don't believe the big bank's future business model involves much cash. However much ordinary people want and need cash.
Sadly, I agree. Liam, great to see you.